Sorry I missed all of that, folks, but
But Eric's been taking notes diligently in the background.
Thanks, Eric. Could we go back 30 seconds where somebody said I was eloquent, please? I just wanted to get that on the record.
Um,
We'll
okay.
save that for the end, Peter.
Any other thoughts on the executive order N1622? Are you ready to move on to the equity impact assessment? Tyson, I'm going to pick on you because you've been quiet.
Sorry, I'm trying to catch up. I've been I came in late. I've got a lot going on and I have a lot in the background, so I apologize. I'm still trying to figure out where we're at, so I don't have a lot to say at this point.
That's okay. So this is the criteria that the state released that we have to use as a starting point for our catalyst awarding when the HRTC votes on the projects that are going to be funded by the 9 million. This is what we have to start with. So we're adding anything additional, how to define these, what are the metrics for these. So far, I know it's kind of challenging. We don't have like a real standard definition of the disinvested communities from the state. So some of that's going to dictate, and we can just keep working on that. So I'm toggling back and forth, adding in your feedback for Catalyst, and then also in this document, collecting feedback for that advocacy letter for the implementation. Because we don't want to fund projects and Catalyst that aren't going to get implementation dollars down the road.
Gotcha.
Erica, what is an equity impact assessment? Is that a term of art that there's an actual thing that gets done?
It's a great question. And when I Googled it, there was not like it was not a standard thing that I could find. But if anyone has experience, supposedly all this criteria came out of previous RFPs. So
let's ask somebody. Let's ask the state if this somebody. Look, can you please give us an example of this? We don't know what this means.
I see a few hands raised. Peter, do you have experience with the?
Yeah, and to hope that there's some clearly defined thing that the state has provided is we're still dreaming, but we use equity impact assessments within the college environment, and so typically it's defined with lead and lag measures when we're looking at it. So like, what will that impact be on XYZ for living wage attainability, right? In this category. So we're looking at, African American males specifically, or something like that. Success outcomes within that, and that's our lead measure is that enrollment within it, and our assessment is does the project allow for access to enrollment? Good. Now our assessment of this is on the back end of it, and that's a component, like a criteria of us applying for particular funds is like, do we have a way to measure it, basically? And so that's my question was going to be along, do we want to qualify what the way to measure it is? Because this is not a cut and dry thing. It's always defined by the different group. Are we going to ask for metrics? Are we going to ask for testimonials? Are we going to just say, oh, well, we served X amount of people. We had 5 to 7 million people come into the area, and we were able to employ 20% more Native American males in 2025 2026 than we did in 22-23. Like, that's the impact equity assessment in the recreation thing, which ties to why we had the recreation program anyways, to serve 5 to 7 million people, allowed for the 20% increase in that year. So that's one way I think we could look at it. The other way would be simply providing the data points. But then I also have the capacity question again. We have institutional research, like 3 people that work in a department. I am like heavily invested and involved in data points every single day for decision-making processes that are tied to categorical equity-based funding accounts. So I wonder, it sounds really great when you write it down on paper. I wonder what we could functionally come up with to narrow it down. But by narrowing it, we're also providing the opportunity to make it very clear and specific.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think?
Sounds very subjective for us. I mean, just for how something like this gets applied to what the work we're doing, I don't know. It sounds like in an academic environment or certain prescribed environments, you can make sense out of it. I wouldn't know how the council would figure out how to come up with a metric for this. At least I can't think of it at the moment.
Elaine, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, on an unrelated thing to the equity impact assessment, something to maybe just flag for conversation later. I've heard it said a couple of times that we don't want to fund anything through Catalyst that isn't eligible for implementation funding, and that should be the lens through which we're shaping this criteria. I don't know that I agree with that, and I think it would be interesting to maybe have that as a group discussion, because there's $100 million available in competitive funding at the end of this across 58 counties. So I almost feel like that's another, like, it's this kind of unspoken criteria we're putting on project opportunities through Catalyst funding, where we might be limiting opportunities to advance other economic investments in our region.
I second that for sure.
So what if we put, what if we define categories? Like, we could have some Catalyst projects that are shooting for, their goal is to also apply for implementation. And then there are some Catalyst projects that maybe their goal is, you know, they want Catalyst to do the feasibility assessment and the CEQA, but they're hoping to get the S&C funding down the road. So they're not even going to go for implementation. They're going to go for something else.
Well,
that's always been the way I've interpreted it. So I'm totally in favor of that. Thanks.
And also this would cycle back to our disinvested community definition, because if we've got consensus on what that is, there may be things that the state criteria the state would impose. It's like, it just doesn't apply to us. And we could probably get more bang for our buck investing in things on the Catalyst side of things to advance things forward, even though the state future funding, which is going to be meager, is not clear. That might be more in our interest, especially if we start talking about federal funding, because there may be criteria for a lot of federal funding and other sources of funding that the state's not going to acknowledge or not going to recognize.
Yeah, the use of Catalyst funds, like in a project, like I'm just thinking thought, and maybe I'm being altruistic, but like the idea that the Catalyst fund allows the capacity to develop to become self-sustainable should be an important goal of what Catalyst fund could be used for. And implementation could be left to maybe a different organization that's now supported by this capacity. But maybe that organization that used the Catalyst doesn't need that ongoing funding because there's other state funding. For instance, like we get enrollment funding. So if I can get something off the ground, well, it's always a matter of like, hey, that's sustainable, but we have to get it off the ground, right? In that context.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, Stan, do you have a thought?
I'm just wondering if we also need to address the equity within our region and how we're going to spread the funding out between the 7 counties.
Yeah. What Stan, do you have initial thoughts on, like, should it be a point system, like if it serves more than 3 counties? Or I'm just making...
well, I think we addressed this a few months ago where it was like, you know, the goal is for something to, you know, have a positive effect on the whole region. That should be the top tier priority. But because of just the geographical, you know, realities of our region, I think then the next tier would be something that affects the whole east side or something that has positive effect on the whole west side, right? And then there was like a third tier, I think, that we discussed that was, you know, like the more counties, the better. You know, I could see, you know, like Alpine County is kind of in the middle, right? I mean, it's accessible from the east and the west, but it's small and it has the lowest population. But, you know, Alpine County could be, you know, in a project with Calaveras and Amador counties and the McColmy watershed, for instance. But it could also be, you know, lumped together with something on the east side, or, you know, maybe there's a mill site or something that's going to affect, you know, Mariposa, Tuolumne, Calaveras County or something. So those are just examples. I'm just kind of throwing those out. But, you know, I think internally, I think we need to have, I don't know if it needs to be in this document that goes to the state, but I think it's a discussion that this group needs to have, and how we're going to prioritize the projects. If, you know, we end up having to weed some out, you know, what's going to be that criteria?
Stan, if I could just add to that real quick. On the west side, are you guys hearing about the Visit California JLL redefinition? You know, they're redoing all the tourism regions across the entire state. That's something that there's a state initiative like that. There's some other things like that in the recreation and tourism space that we should get together. Maybe Erica, if you've got some staff, you could help us with this to figure out which of these larger state initiatives are already happening that may already cover our geography, and that could get us to those common things that are, we don't have to figure it out. It's already being done. So that's, I think we should follow up on that for sure.
Yeah, we can definitely follow up.
Visit California. You guys have been talking to JLL, right, Erica?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so we're talking to them, but we can follow up on that. But there's a number of these region-wide things that we should nail down and say we are all in on these things already, and that could help. That could be a scoring criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if in what you wrote there, number 2 should be east side or west side, and then number 3 should be, you know, more counties the better, or you know, just as to put it very simply.
I'll clean it up.
Yeah.
And my thought is also the number of people impacted, right? So, I mean, I hate to go to population, but population is going to need to play some sort of a role, or the number of people that are receiving a positive benefit has to be part of the ranking.
Well, and can we count the, well, it's an open question. Can we count the visitor audience in that or not? I'm just throwing that out there. That's something to think about. I mean, if you look at the state CNRA's, you know, connecting people to nature policy, you know, there's a lot of state policies that maybe we could say, hey, we're helping 5 million people with public health issues, with obesity issues, with connecting them to nature, with all kinds of other things, interpretive opportunities for nature-based solutions, all that kind of stuff. So I throw that out there as an open question.
I think that's an interesting point. My follow-up question would be in terms of like just prioritizing, like, do we want to prioritize like these communities, like the people that live there first, maybe?
Sure, of course. But as a point of leverage, is something that, hey, we're advancing other statewide policies. It's something to maybe think about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that we carry data on the impact of visitors. I mean, it's our number 1 economic engine, right?
Awesome.
But I don't know that everybody else carries that metrics. So I don't want to be disadvantaged to any, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let's compare whatever data, Kath, whatever you've got, whatever we've got, because maybe, Erica, we could kind of pool that a little bit. This goes back to Stan, to your point about what do we have in common, east side and west side, and maybe, you know, those are things we could pool that would be regionally advantageous.
Okay.
Quick time check, Erica.
Maybe
12:48.
Oh, yep. Peter, hand up.
Yes, so number of people impacted, I think, could be viewed in a variety of ways, right? You got the visitor, you got the local people, you might have a higher population, but you might also have a multiplier effect through something specific. And I don't know how to qualify that specifically, but you know, you might initially serve a few people, let's say in workforce training, or let's say in the development of XYZ project. I keep using XYZ today, but that then has an impact on allowing another 1.2 million visitors to, you know, whatever. So is there a multiplier component of it? Either it's serving a high number of people or it's serving a low number, but it has a multiplying impact based on that project.
Definitely.
Might be a fair way to equitably distribute that decision-making point.
Yeah. Okay, great. So just in terms of our time check, let's just do these last 2 bullets, and then I'll send all this out so you'll have more time. This isn't our only opportunity to comment. And then we'll move on to our next piece. So they want us to include, additionally, they want us to include some sort of displacement analysis. And if it's going to be a problem, is there an avoidance strategy? I feel like this is a little bit more of an urban.
Yeah, that's not, I mean, that's displacement. Okay, so when we have a disaster, people leave and don't come back. I mean, what are we talking here?
Yeah.
Yeah, for us, right? It's wildfire.
Well, it's all the climate things, wildfire, flooding, hurricanes, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Weather.
Yeah, which is climate. I mean, you can that that all tie all that stuff to climate.
But I'm pretty sure when the state writes this, I think they're referring to like upzoning or
Gentrification.
gentrification. Yeah.
Well, we have that's an interesting topic because it gets back to housing. No one can afford to live in these places anymore. And I don't know how that we factor that into all this. It's sort of the opposite of the urban thing, but I know housing is, we can't talk about housing, but people can't afford to live here. And that's a displacement thing. So when disasters happen, when the climate stuff happens, people have to leave. They don't move intra-regionally. They leave. They completely go somewhere else.
Well, it's not just they can't afford to live here, it's we can't afford to build here.
Yeah, exactly. It's everything. It's the whole thing.
And we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the water, sewer.
Okay, great. So I just added a bullet on that. Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as like displacement goes within the scope of this program and our region, I mean, so long as we're not importing workers or let's say large companies from outside of our region to come in and kind of like run some of these programs or be the employees or workforce of these programs, we would be essentially kind of working against that and ensuring that we're not displacing any of our local population because we're not, bringing in people to do these jobs and that are going to take up limited housing supply or limited job access.
One other quick thing is the unintended consequences of prevailing wage legislation in the state. So if the state says, hey, people working on wildfire mitigation, things like that, everybody's going to get prevailing wages. It's so out of sync with the local economies that can have all kinds of unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a mismatch between the needs that we have and what's the policy that's coming out of the state.
Great. What about this community engagement strategy with feedback mechanisms?
It's critical.
It should be part of our, it's part of our plan. I mean,
It's absolutely critical. If we're not talking to each other, we're screwed. So
right. And I mean, I'm sure all of you have your community engagement partners. I mean, I've got a whole list of them, right? And so I do outreach both, we use our community access TV or public access, social media, emails, news, radio. It's part of the whole engagement strategy with all of our partners. And then there's always feedback because it always comes back to Kathy Galino at calaveras.gov.
one other quick thing to add is the role of broadband, digital 395, and leveraging and using those kinds of things. That's something that's not in the regional summary. We'll be adding that. It wasn't mentioned in there. But to enhance community engagement using, I'm not sure what you guys have on the west side. We've got a ridiculous amount of broadband here on the east side. But that needs to be a part of an economic development strategy. Certainly for community engagement. I mean, we're doing this stuff, a lot of it because we have just ridiculous amount of broadband over here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else on this last bullet? Okay. So when we send this back out, read through it again, add additional comments. There's also there's some climate criteria, and then there's the job quality and access criteria. And then if you can get that back to us as soon as possible. Oh, Stan?
I was just going to say that the climate piece, I could see as maybe coming back to that if we have time, because I think it's really straightforward. If we can, I mean, that's my 2 cents. I mean, someone else may disagree.
That's critical.
Well, it's critical, but I just don't think there's a whole lot to talk about. I mean, we need projects that are going to go with those goals. I think that it's an easier definition.
I agree.
that we don't necessarily need to spend a bunch of time on right now with only 30 minutes left is what
Right.
that's what I was
Oh, yeah,
referring
it's
to.
fine, fine.
Exactly. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. The question, so it does just say align with major state climate goals and policies, and then it, you know, it lists out the four. So I guess the question is to what metrics does align mean? Other than this one is pretty, you know, straightforward. Not fund new fossil fuel extractions or activities or expand fossil fuel production.
I think we're good there.
Okay. All right.
There's too little and too much to talk about on that one.
Okay. So.
Wait a second.
Oh.
Can you go back?
Yep, I'm going back.
Why are we not talking about job quality and access? Because that's one that I have a major problem with.
Yeah, we can talk about this right now. If we also wanted to touch on the draft RFP and a few other things.
Yeah. Well, if I could just say one thing, because I brought this up at both the meetings that the state hosted, and they didn't have an answer. But when you come to consistent scheduling, like a lot of the industries here are seasonal. Like a bunch of workers are really active until snow falls on the ground, and then they're done for the season. And then there's another industry that gets real active when there is snow on the ground. And so we really need them to address seasonal work and the realities of this environment. Because there's good seasonal jobs, but they're not year round. You're not going to do, you know, forest work in January. Well, hopefully not. Hopefully there's too much snow, but you get what I'm saying, though. I mean, they didn't have an answer for that when I brought that up with them at either meeting. And so I think we need to make sure that seasonal work is going to be left out of this program, because then you're going to have disinvested communities getting disinvested from this whole program.
That's a very good point.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point. There's a lot of examples of that we could fold into this. Yeah, we got lots of examples over here for sure.
Any other thoughts on the job quality and access?
Well, my general thoughts are that, you know, a guy who spent half his life in the Bay Area, a lot of this stuff is it's created for urban environments. You know, it's, I mean, retirement benefits and upward mobility and, you know, access to training. We got junior colleges and some, you know, some groups doing that. You know, safe working conditions. I mean, you know, forest work is the most dangerous working conditions there are, but nothing aligns more with the climate goals than thinning out our forests. So, you know, how are some of these things gonna affect our region if they, you know, if they're really looking at that sort of thing? So,
I've just pointed the disinvested. I mean, that definition is something I think we really all got to work on, because there's ways to get those kinds of things in there, and all these things, all this other stuff tears from that. And I think our time would be well spent, because that's something we can give to the state. Say, look, this is who we are, and fit if we don't fit, but you know, this is what we're dealing with here.
Great.
And when we're looking at the total, like in all reality, the total amount of dollars that exist, right? And we're talking about retirement benefits, 100 million is not going to get very far, right? So it's really 100 million at that point. It's still just a micro catalyst. We're talking multi-tens of billions to set up workforce and retirement savings plans and everything for everybody. So it just probably needs to be reasonable. And I love the inclusion of the part-time yearly. Many people that I work with, they work part-time, and the rest of the year they're either off or they're on unemployment or something like that. And that's a functional life for them, livable wage, etc.
Yeah, I think when we were in Sacramento talking with the state, one of the things that they said was there was a recognition of some of the unique conditions that exist in our region, given its rural nature, and that they're going to be developing an operational plan that was going to be like the state's guidelines for trying to implement some of these regional strategies, and that they were going to approach it through an urban lens and a rural lens. So I think the this is a great opportunity for us to provide them some guidance on what that means.
Bring on that rural lens.
Mm-hmm. Great. What else?
I think one of the biggest challenges with that section about providing like you know, the retirement benefits and all of those extras is a lot of times those are far removed from the types of jobs that are made available to people in lower income settings and disinvested communities. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out and what kind of programs are developed that are able to actually provide a sustainable job to people who typically don't have access and to those in an equitable fashion.
I might also add, like, I know we're supposed to stay away from housing, right? But considerations of transportation, like it doesn't have to say you're going to provide transportation, but also that in our divested rural communities, like Elaine was saying, I think it was Elaine, I wasn't looking at the screen, but the access to training, consistent scheduling, and things like that also. So is there any effort by this applicant to actually consider the impacts of what transportation has on it, right? If we're going to have housing that's affordable, let's say in Bishop, but people need to do a job up in Mammoth, we got to get 45 miles from one to the other. And just that consideration should be a consideration of equity, even though we might not be able to consider housing, perhaps transportation. Or am I out of line?
So back up 1 second. So you're talking about back up to the equity impact assessment with that?
No, I just meant in an equitable sense when you're talking down there where we had sorry, I'm trying to follow along on
access.
Job quality and access. So access to a job, I think transportation, and maybe I'm alone in it, but transportation I think is an important component of accessing a job. Is that we have an Eastern Sierra regional transport, we got a Western regional transport, we got all these different things, but is it connected to what the application is? Some of these jobs are going to be happening, at least that the applications will come for, in areas where current transportation infrastructure doesn't exist. So is there a consideration or an eye towards providing access to an actual job, but also considering the transportation impacts? Maybe am I
critical point. The vastness of the landscapes, these are geographical questions, which defines who we are, and it needs to be allotted for when talking about any kind of employment situation.
So I'm thinking through how to word that, Peter. So I guess the question is like, does it leverage local transit, and does
invest in?
Yeah, because right, we're thinking through the impact, like the emissions impact. Is that what I'm hearing for, like, if you've got a mill that's 50 miles and everybody's got to drive 50 miles to get to it, then correct me if I'm wrong. Am I on track with what you're saying?
I think emissions is one. I think maybe the other thing is just like functionally, how are people going to get to work? Like they don't have a car, right? If they're just starting out, they just went through some workforce training, and this catalyst, or implementation level project is going to say, hey, we're going to do this thing, and now we're going to get 50 people to go to this mill. How are those 50 people going to get there? There is an environmental impact to that, but there's also like a reality impact.
I think he's trying to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're trying to identify that as like a benefit. It was like a job quality thing. I know that, for instance, all the ski resorts, Bear Valley and Dodge Ridge on the west side, like they all bust their employees up. I mean, they do that because they get their employees to work. They need them to show up, and so that's a huge benefit. And so is that what you're trying to just identify, like almost like another benefit?
Yes, thank you. That's you put it in better words than I could. Yeah, another benefit. And the benefit of that is that there's at least a concept that's expressed around transportation either being provided or available.
Another piece approaching housing tangentially is the more you can invest in public transit to move people around so they don't have to have 3 cars or a car and a truck and all that kind of stuff. What available private land is left is available for housing. You're not using it for cars and parking infrastructure and that kind of stuff.
Recently that's right. And then recently we had a group that we applied with for a grant and it's not necessarily about what we applied for, but they indicated that they were going to work with the regional transport to add a bus stop at this location so that people could make it there. And that was like a thing that I never considered before when doing an application in something like this was what is that impact and how can I either get the access for people to actually get there. Otherwise, we're just relying on everyone to bootstrap it up, the American way and just get there because, wow, they get a job, at $17 an hour, something like that.
So I wonder if that should also be part of I feel like that, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone disagrees, but I feel like that could be included in the equity impact assessment. Because we could list out like what our region would like to see. And so, because it's kind of like a feasibility analysis, like how feasible are, people getting to that, that access piece.
Type it.
All right, other thoughts on the criteria. And like I said, I'll clean this up. I'll send it out. You can sleep on it and add more feedback if something comes up later. So this won't be the last opportunity to do this. Greg, you've been really quiet. Do you have any thoughts?
I keep going back to Stan's comment about seasonality. Occurs to me that our entire economy, our entire population up here is seasonal, except for a very small and limited group of people. If you have a forestry job, if you work at a ski resort, if you have your own company and you run a mini mart on the highway or something like that, you're very affected by the seasons and by the weather. And so, well, that's a major component at CHIPS, that's for sure. It's all based on season. And so getting to some of this, the equity that we've been talking about, is very tough when there's only work 6 months out of a year. There's 6 months that we're not paying attention to that. And so in our case, we work almost entirely with Native Americans and getting them to an equitable position in society going to be very tough. It's they're very far behind and frankly not moving forward at a very high speed. So I don't know any other way to express that or to include it. Frankly, we can impress upon people, but that's a difficult one to get your arms around. It's hard to change that seasonality in any way or improve it. Boy, not with the limited resources that we're talking about here.
What about organization partnerships for seasonal work? So like all the organizations and entities that offer seasonal work in the region, like if you create a calendar and you're like, these are all the summer seasonal jobs and these are all the winter seasonal jobs. Like, could there be like opportunity like down the road for a program for someone to say, oh, I work in forestry in the summer. Like these are all your opportunities and like prioritize like the seasonal.
The one trick with that is the example, say, of staffing at Mammoth Mountain, where they can get work for maybe 7 months, but the company does not want to make them full time because then it gets in having to provide health insurance and benefits and that kind of stuff. If the thing you're talking about, Erica, could provide glue, i.e. health insurance, some retirement benefit programs so that people could go back and forth between seasonal jobs, but there's an economic glue holding it together, then you're talking about something. But that would be kind of the critical path, I would think.
Yeah. So if the organization that's like the host organization could provide some sort of baseline services or leverage like existing, like, yeah.
Yeah, because the companies have an interest in keeping people seasonal.
Someone should put this in the project ideation tracker.
We definitely have to keep our the majority of our workers seasonal, or we couldn't afford to do the work. But we do conduct outreach to where if we can place these people in the off season with a ski resort, with any other ski park, you name it, snowmobiles, we try to get them employed if we can. But that does take a back seat to the actual main work that we're trying to do during the summer.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just thinking if there's an opportunity to build capacity to, just because this, for our region, this is such a, a big issue.
And seasonality is not always a big negative. A lot of the people that work for us like having that half year off. They do plenty of other stuff. They take their families off and visit relatives, in other states, you name it. There's probably half of all our employees are perfectly fine with the fact that the job is seasonal and they look forward to that off time.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to understand how big of an emergency that is.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left. So we will send this out. If you would like to, on just prioritizing time right now, can review. We sent out that draft RFP this morning. So feel free to comment, redline, ask questions. As I said in the beginning, we're just trying to help with the heavy lift of getting it going. But we won't release it until we have full approval from this group. For just as a kind of a update of a draft timeline of what we are currently looking at. This is very drafty, just FYI. You guys all saw this back in December, this graphic, and we're still on track for this. We've been working on that project ideation tracking system. Our team is currently taking another stab at that internal organizing, just to kind of, there's so many projects now. I think we've got, I don't know, like over 100 or something of just ideas that were submitted that we're using as data points for that strategic plan. And then we are currently planning industry sector and project specific workshops. So the project workshops are going to be in July. We'll have 2 weeks that we've blocked off in July we haven't scheduled them yet, but it's currently in the background happening. And then 1 week in August where people will have a chance to work on aggregating like these projects, like more in depth. So they can be open to the communities, subcommittees, HRTC will host them, East Side, West Side, and we'll have a chance to really hash that through. Hold that thought, Joan. And then, but just in preparation for those workshops, I saw Shauna come on camera. So we are going to do like a taster exercise at that April 25th strategic planning meeting in North Lake Tahoe. And we wanted to get your feedback on what would be helpful for us designing that exercise. Just project ideas. We're not putting physical like, oh, so-and-so's project is on the table. It's just going to be ideas and themes.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to, so I think in light of time, I can just tell you what we have planned, and I'd love to get your feedback. And also, Erica, can you go to the next slide? Because there's a lot more detail based on what you just said relates to those workshops. So what we're trying to do, I'm here because my role is to help with the design of the strategic planning process. And we're just trying to make sure that you all understand this, but we're trying to lower the lower the confusion around the Catalyst program and the strategic planning, and then also offer up sort of where the dovetail and crossover is. But so this is just a detail of what Erica talked about with more detail. So we have two. April 25th and 26th is the collaborative strategy workshops, where we're hoping we'll get at least 100 people in the room, and round tables, and work on co-creating the strategic priorities that we want to move forward into a document that's due to the state on April 31st. Part of that, as you remember, is we're gonna have 2 hours on day one where we're calling it sort of a project ideation workshop, and there's kind of two components. So people will be at small tables based on industry sectors, and we will ask them to two things: sort and cluster. Sort is they're going to be given a box that is literally filled with 100 pieces of paper, and what people have been asking us for is they want to be involved with some of this, like looking at the projects and then sorting them by the strategic framework that we'll have outlined as part of the morning part of the meeting, and we'll have a structure and set of goals. And what we want to do is just get a feeling from the participants in the room, sort of where do they see in the sorting, where do they see some of these project ideas fitting in? And then secondly, some of them are really obvious, so it'll go really fast. And then the second part is, clustering, and looking at sort of like, wow, so we have 25 projects related to trails that are in the industry sector area of sustainable rec. And we don't have any over here in this area, and just start to get more of the collaborative view into the work that you all are doing, so that when it rolls out down the line, they will have had 2 hours to sort of sit and soak in and move around and interact with this information. What we wanted to do is ask each of you to sit at each of these tables. I'm assuming many of you are going to be there. But when questions come up about you be an ambassador from this committee to other collaborative members, to just sort of bring in your expertise and answers to some of the questions regarding the process. And so thoughts there?
Yeah, if I could, I think Erica, David Griffith sent an email out a couple of days ago about conflicts of interest. And I think it's going to be critically important for Sierra Business Council to define what that means. None of this is happening under a public records. This is not Bagley-Keene. This is not Brown Act. There are no laws applying to this. But I mean, all the discussion we had earlier about capacity, which is so important and so critical, all of us are doing 9 different things at the same time. And I think it's going to be, in order to have a good, successful, transparent conversation about how to do this the best way possible, I think everybody needs to know what the rules are, what the guidelines are, and what the expectations are. I don't think any one of us wants to be participating in this and get it something where a council comes up later and says, "Oh, wait a minute, you're a volunteer board member for that group. We can't do that project." This has got to be laid out very, very clearly and with complete transparency. I just ran into this problem. I serve on this OPR group and to doing the 5th climate assessment, and it got all boggled up in that nonsense. So,
yeah. So we're not making any decisions. We're just asking them to help sort ideas.
It's not about making decisions. It's about establishing the groundwork, the safe space for all of us to operate in. No one's making decisions, but this is a relatively small group of people with a lot of really important interests at stake here. And I think it's going to be really helpful for everybody to know.
That's great.
This is what the rules are. This is how we're going to do this.
Great. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Anybody else on sort of, we want that 2 hours to not just be helpful to the work we're doing around developing a strategic plan, but also for your work. Like, that's the question. That's why I came today, is what question could we ask, or what could we do that would be sort of helpful for you all to have as a larger participation in some of the work you're doing? Nothing, just, I mean, they're gonna review they're gonna have the process, and there's gonna be some information about the Catalyst program, and then you'll get a feeling. There is some sorting. Erica talked about the staff did some sorting. There's going to be a different sorting, and it'll be kind of interesting to see what a larger group of people, where they put things, and then the clusters, right? Like where they see synergies, where they're starting to see a lot of synergies.
I think what will be really helpful as you guys lead up to the meeting. We're trying to get, I think all of us are trying to get as many participants and people to go. It's kind of a stretch. Everybody's got to drive. We got to pay staff to work all day. You know, this is a burden, which is fine. But I think to be explicitly clear as to the expectations of what is going to be happening at these 2 hours, these, you know, whatever's going to be going on in really layperson speak. So we can encourage participation from people who don't know what a cluster is and they don't know what that is or what this is. You know, and that's going to be really helpful. I think all of us can then use our networks, leverage our networks, get the information out to people. I want to thank Magnolia for trying to navigate the Hampton Inn up there in Truckee the other day. I mean, none of this is really going to be kind of easy. So the more inviting and easy and straightforward it can be, the better it's going to be for the process.
Okay, great. All right.
Just as a disclaimer, John, nothing about this program is easy.
I know, but it's really, really important, and we're all hanging in there.
No, but I appreciate the feedback. We're working on that external agenda right now, and I appreciate hearing, just make it the layperson piece. I try to bring that, but I could even do it more.
Yeah, so when I'm talking to board members, I'm talking to advocates, I'm talking to stakeholders, I'm talking, hey, you have an interest in this. This is why you need to show up. This is why you need to go spend the night up in Truckee and participate in these.
Okay,
so that'll be really
helpful
if you can do that.
That'd be great. Okay.
Any other thoughts?
I'd like to add a little bit to what John was saying around ground rules and transparency for organizations and projects being advanced. You know, I know that there was an email that came out recently with concerns around, you know, people participating in this process and then having an advantage in moving their projects forward, for instance. And I think there's like, Peter and I had this conversation the other day, and we have this conversation all the time, that like one of the limitations around having capacity in rural areas is it's like always the 12 same people in the room. And I think you know a little bit what that's like. I'm going to get off this Zoom call and I'm going to get a Zoom call later, and like half of you are going to be on that one too, right? And so I think it's a little bit inherent to the process that people who are engaged with California Jobs First are also going to be associated with the organizations that will be advancing projects or having a role in implementation, because those are the organizations that we have in the region who could participate in the process in the first place. So I think maybe one of the things that might be valuable, perhaps a little premature, is in the conversation in Truckee, as people are clustering projects, to start thinking about, you know, a little bit about like who's responsible for implementing certain things and who are the partners to that, who are going to be, you know, industries, sector implementation agencies that we're going to be working with. It might be helpful for starting to build out some of those partnerships as we're moving towards Catalyst.
Yeah, I think, and I know one thing that at least Kristen and I have talked about internally is getting some more information, like maybe some rough budget numbers and like because we've got all these ideas and they're so high level, it's really hard to conceptualize like what implementation is going to look like. And so I think we were talking about maybe, you know, if you guys all approve, like kind of sending out like an unofficial, like more info just before this. So, and it might help with some of those workshops as well.
And Erica, one thing that could also be helpful, maybe when Kaylee was around, when she was running this group, there was it was said that there's a difference between the project ideas that have been submitted, and Sean, I thought what I heard you say, they're being used to help kind of frame or provide content for the strategic plan itself, but they're not actually project submittals. Is that true? Okay, so that differentiation is not clear to people, and I think it's going to be
exactly
clarify that.
Because we do not So just imagine a page that has in a traditional strategic plan, it'll have goals, strategies, and examples of the types of projects that might activate these goals and strategies. That's all we're going to be able to put in the strategic plan. So examples of the types of projects, and it'll say things like a regional trail system, a workforce housing program, training program related to forestry. Like that's the kind of thing, because we want people to, different brains think differently, and it's like that's the level that we need for this deliverable. While you guys all carry on your whole Catalyst,
So I think it'd be very, very important and very helpful for Shauna and SBC to make that differentiation, because people have an expectation because they've submitted a project idea. They think that somehow they've submitted a project, but that's, from what I'm understanding, that's not actually a project submission. We're working on an RFP for project submissions. I think
exactly. That's why we made this. Yeah, I 100% agree with you.
Okay, so that's something that would be very helpful to clarify that, so people understand, the apples and the oranges.
Yeah, we'll keep saying, and this graphic, we kind of pulled, Shauna and Jill and I kind of all collaboratively pulled this together just as a draft. So this kind of shows that there's a more official process. So for example, if the workshops end in August, then that would give a few more weeks to put together official applications. And that RFP will open September 1st.
This is exactly the step. You have to make it absolutely clear.
Yeah, but here's the main problem. Here's the exact thing that's going to stress people out. We're going from collaboration, and then boom, it's a competition.
Fine. If that's what it is, then you just get...
I mean, it truly is. It's like, we almost need something at the top that's like collaboration, and then it's...
We need to know that. We need to know that, because if we don't know that, are we collaborating or are we competing? Are we conflict of interest or are we not? Are we doing a joint regional? We know what role are all of us playing in these various iterations. So it'd be really helpful if you could really, really clarify that. That would be super helpful thing to do.
So one of the things, just imposing this to all of you, is with the projects we've had, like I said, we've had like over 100 ideas submitted so far for the region. Some of them are very small, like location focused. Some of them are very broad. But, I think the thought behind those workshops is that it's an opportunity to sit down and say, okay, we got 50 projects in outdoor rec. Well, actually, we'll just say trails. Instead of, we can't fund 50 trail projects, but is there opportunity to make it one project that funds maybe 40 initiatives? Does that make sense? So it's like it's a larger picture program. So I think we are hoping that the workshops will get people thinking, so it's less of a competitive atmosphere and more of a collaborative, like how can we make these projects better, regional, more inclusive, like think bigger. Like,
right, because inherently, like I think that there is that very, very linear interpretation of this process, that we're collaborating, and then there's Catalyst and it's competitive, or there's implementation that's competitive. I think one of the things that's always important to be considering in this as a project from the state, as we've heard, is they're going to start, they're considering allocating funding to the Eastern Sierra region. And so we need the Catalyst projects. We should be thinking a little bit about for those to be region-wide, there is going to be new partnerships that have to be forged. There's going to be new collaborations. It's not, there may be certain projects that are going to be competitive, but what we need to be thinking about in a lot of these is for the partners, East Side, West Side, 7 counties that are going to come together to be implementing this Catalyst implementation, and when this funding is gone.
Yeah, but I go back again to this definition of the project ideas, because Erica, what you're talking about is the 100 ideas you've got are just to inform the strategic plan. Those aren't the actual project submissions. So that, Shauna, your point about making that different, that, we're done collaborating, now we're getting into a competitive thing. That's just going to be really helpful, because people may have thought, hey, I submitted.
Yeah, maybe that's not the right word. Maybe just like,
however you want to frame it. It's
just in my mind, because I've worked a lot with grant making, it's like these are a really supportive, these are kind of grant maker workshops. Like, you want to apply to this RFP, we are setting up workshops to help you.
Yeah, and that because people, I think a lot of people have submitted a project idea. It doesn't occur to them, oh, wait a minute, you're going to have to be responding to an RFP in August.
Exactly. That was
that is not known.
I just
not
understood this in the last couple of weeks. So I think this is just, that's why we created the graphic, is we were like, oh, we need to start getting the information out.
Let's just make that clear to everybody. That would be really helpful.
Just want to highlight Tyson's comment in the chat here about competitiveness and how that can impact disinvested communities and their involvement. So
yeah, 100% agree. I
think part of that branding, kind of how you communicate, like, you know, the democratic process was us coming together and not agreeing or seeing eye to eye, but still moving forward on where the decision was. Well, it's not really the case anymore, because now it's either you're with this camp or this camp, and there's nothing in between, which is unfortunate. And I feel like we don't have to view it or treat this like that. Like, I think how we communicate, hey, let's come out and let's figure out how to encourage and support each other's creative process and ideas. So it's more of a community focus of creativity to deliver the best kind of RFP. You know what I mean? I think part of that is we're asking people to apply for RFPs that don't have a clue what they're doing, and they're not going to have the vocabulary that caters to grants, right? And I think, you know, being in the nonprofit world, I have grant writers that are awesome because they know the correct vocabulary, they know how to like place and strategically apply for those RFPs. But we're catering to the masses, like they don't have that, they don't know that. So can we offer some kind of like support for them? Otherwise, we're just going to be giving it to the same nonprofits or companies that know how to write for grants. You know what I mean? I think if we're really trying to engage disinvested communities, then we're going to have to kind of approach this from a different perspective. Otherwise, we're just kind of catering to the same kind of, you know, academic perspective.
I think that's great, Tyson, and super. So maybe like in those project workshops, we somehow just like structure them so we pay the grant writers to come and help like people are like articulate their ideas, and maybe that's like a part of that process.
Yeah, even offer like, you know, so many hours of, you know,
TA. It's TA, yeah,
editing of some sort, you know. And I think you know, even like I have a friend that's started a consulting business here in Mariposa. You know, it's my former executive director for the Alliance, right? And so she would love to do something like this and offer, if we could block out funding to, you know, to pay a consultant to come in and help these families or people write the RFPs or do something. I mean, there's got to be a way that we can frame it out and offer those supports that's kind of built in.
Yeah, let's keep talking about that in the next in our next subcommittee meeting. Okay, it is 1:33. I want to be conscientious of everyone's time. Are there any burning questions before we log off? We'll send all of this out. I'm going to start drafting up that advocacy letter to the state via implementation criteria. I'll clean up the notes for the catalyst criteria, and then you guys can add further comments. We'll send the slide deck out, and then please review. Also, we'll resend that draft RFP out and let us know if you have additional thoughts, questions, things that should be in there.
Is this group meeting again before April 25th or no?
This group is not meeting before that.
What do you think about renaming this group, just for clarity? Because I think that's part of the confusion. Is this is called the Project ID Subcommittee, and aren't you really now the Catalyst Program Subcommittee? I mean, you're really focused on you're rolling out the process for Catalyst.
Yeah, we didn't know it was going to be called Catalyst when we created it.
Yeah, well, it's just something.
But we're not identifying. I think the important point there, Sean, is we're not identifying projects. Like, we're not recommending projects. Is that correct?
That's what it says in this graphic, John.
Where we are recommending projects?
Yeah, you guys are recommending. This committee is recommending projects
buckets
based on the criteria.
On what date?
So there's the RFP opens and then it closes, and then this committee reviews the proposals and then evaluates them based on a point system.
This goes back to that conflict of interest thing, because it's one thing when we're doing the kind of work about collaboration, and to Tyson's point, how do we make sure everybody's covered here? But you guys need to figure out what's going to happen, because every one of us who's participating in these meetings, we're going to have interest in the projects that are going to be there. And that's something we need to talk about. That needs to be figured out.
And just a clarifying point, remember from the original charter that the projects are going to be aggregated into buckets. So they're not going to be voted on individually. So SBC, I think, will do the first stab. This subcommittee, we'll review and say, like, you know, yes, like we kind of agree with this, or, oh, let's kind of tweak things. Like, we know, you know, so, but there will be, they'll be voted on in buckets by the council.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, whatever, I mean, just, you know, whatever you guys think is going to make sense is going to work. But that's something that I think would be helpful for everybody to understand.
Yep.
All right. Bye.
See y'all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Work. See y'all.
Good meeting. Thank you all very much.